The Prophet Lut alayhi salam was the son of Haran. Son of Haran, who was the brother of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Lut alayhi salam was the nephew of Ibrahim. Most of you will probably know the story of Lut and his people. But just as a short, I suppose, reminder or summary, the people of Lut were a people who engaged in the act of homosexuality. So they had relations between members of the same gender. Lut alayhi salam did his utmost, as much as he could, to try and dissuade his people from committing such actions. But they were relentless. Eventually Allah Jalla wa Ala, in His wisdom and His punishment and His mercy, decided to send down, to send malaika, to send angels to inform Lut alayhi salam that the people of his town would be punished for their sins. So when the angels came, they came as young, beautiful men. And when they came to the house of Lut alayhi salam, in fact, the story is that they went first to Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then they went to Lut. So Ibrahim alayhi salam was aware of what was going to happen. And they went to the house of Lut, and when the people of his town saw these young, beautiful men entering his house, they started beating on his door. They started beating on his door, asking to be able to see the men, those young men, obviously with only one intent. Lut alayhi salam chastised them, and he said that, this isn't something that's permissible for you. In fact, he even went as far, according to certain translations, to say, take my daughters. Take my daughters. You people who are bent and committed to this action of having your way with these young men, take my own daughters, because they're purer for you and it's acceptable for you. But despite that, the people of Lut would not listen, and he became upset. The angels revealed to him that they were messengers from Allah Jalla wa Ala, and that Allah had ordered him to leave with those who believed with him, to leave in the night. And they also informed him that his wife would be left behind, as she was one of the wrongdoers. It's not clear whether she practiced that. And I think a lot of Mufassirun would say that she didn't, but she was nevertheless a sinful woman. So she would be left behind. The result was that when they had left, come the morning or come later than that, I'm not sure, but Allah Jalla wa Ala ripped the city from its roots and raised it so high that some scholars say that the dogs of the city could be heard in the heavens, and that the city was sent crashing down on its face when Allah Jalla wa Ala rained on top of it stones from the hellfire. This is a story that most people know. There are differences in the story, but that is essentially what happened to the people of Lut alayhi salam. So why have I decided to talk about Lut alayhi salam in this khutbah? Recently, not too long ago, some brothers and I had a meeting with a practicing brother that we know, where he'd been away from the Jama'ah, he'd been away from a company for some time, and he confided in us finally, after we sort of sat down with him and talked to him, and alhamdulillah, he felt that he could have that discussion, and he confided in the fact that he actually had feelings for members of the same gender. It's not something that we think about, really, to be honest. It's not something that day-to-day Muslims are probably aware of. Homosexuality is a kabira. It is a grave sin. It's not just a small sin. It's not like you went into a shop and and I don't know, you picked up something and you took it away. It is one of the major sins in Islam. And the punishment that was set upon the people of Lut was severe. There are people now who try and twist the understanding of what the scholars since the time of after the Prophet ﷺ have had consensus on. And the Prophet ﷺ said that my ummah will never be united upon a misguidance. So there is a consensus amongst the scholars that the sin of the people of Lut alayhi salam was the sin of homosexuality. The Christians say now, in a bid to try and maintain their congregations, who have maybe these inclinations or these attitudes, they say actually the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was in fact the sin of being inhospitable to those angels that descended, in a way to spin what is essentially what Allah has ordained as being a major sin. And there are also people who are Muslims, and they are Muslims. Because a major sin does not take a person outside the fold of Islam. Even if he or she commits it, it does not make them a disbeliever. So there are Muslims who say that actually, when Allah Jalla wa Ala says in certain verses that whoever exceeds the bounds, then they have transgressed, and they put a spin or an understanding on it that has never actually been said by any of the scholars, the classical scholars certainly, about what that means. And they say that transgressing the bounds is having relations between a man and an animal. That is transgressing the bounds, as if to say that having relations between members of the same gender is acceptable. Those people who are honest will know that when the Prophet ﷺ, when the Quran was revealed to him, anything that was needed to be explained to the companions was explained to them. And there is no mufassir from the companions or from the best generations that came after the Prophet ﷺ that have accepted that understanding of those verses. Homosexuality, brothers, and I think it's important to also now define this, because there is also an ignorance amongst our community. There's also a perception that if a person, that a Muslim, feels a particular way about members of the same gender, that person is a homosexual. The scholars do not classify that person as being a homosexual. That person is attracted to another person as people are attracted to members of the opposite sex. I remember when we had a 4 or 5 hour conversation with his brother. And he said to us, Wallahi, I don't want to feel this way, but I feel that it just happens. It's not a choice that I make. He said that it's just there. I just feel it. I mean, leaving aside the argument, there could be a number of reasons for that. You know, he was maintaining that there is no choice in him feeling the way that he does, although he doesn't act on it. And this, brothers, is essentially the difference between the person who is labelled and classified a homosexual in our deen and the one who isn't. That if a person has an attraction for people of the same gender, that does not make him or her a homosexual. It makes them a person who are struggling with feelings that could potentially cause them to fall into major sin. So the homosexual is the person who engages in intercourse with a person of the same gender. And the thing is that when Muslims talk about taking homosexuals and throwing them off the cliff, right? There has to be evidence, substantial evidence, to be able to find people having engaged. So you would have to have witnessed this act. So I would challenge most people, who are, always baying for the blood of these people, to say, who has caught two people in the act of intercourse? Okay? I mean, in some ways the notion is quite ludicrous, and that's why, from what I've read, what I can understand, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was no punishment on anyone who was seen in that act, naturally. So I think part of what I'm trying to say is that we have to be a little bit sensible about our approach to dealing with this. In the second part of the khutbah, I'll talk about that a little bit more. Just before I end the first part of the khutbah, there's two things. The first is that although homosexuality isn't a new phenomenon, we live in an age where we are surrounded by images. And those people who do marketing, right, who want us to buy their products and who want us to engage with them, will often use very, very good-looking people, men and women, to sell their products. So wherever you go, it's virtually inescapable. You can find, a beautiful young man or a beautiful young woman, who are sitting or standing with a product or engaging in some sort of half-sexual banter or some sort of position in order to for people to buy that. The Prophet ﷺ said in authentic narration, whoever can guarantee the chastity of what is between his two jawbones and what is between his two legs, then I guarantee paradise for him. In Bukhari. So whatever we say and what our private parts do, those are some of the most difficult things to control. And that's why, people who are engaged in marketing and advertising and these sort of things, it's not by accident that they choose to market things in this way, because they know that the desires of people, that primal desire rather, is bent towards young, beautiful men and women. What's more is, with the internet now becoming accessible to everyone, not just by laptops but on mobile phones as well, there are incidents that I know of young people having received very sexually explicit material, either from school friends or downloading it themselves off the internet. So we're living in an age, actually, where it's become increasingly more difficult, where people, all of us, young and old, but especially the young, have access and opportunity to see things that they themselves might not have actually gone to look for, but may have sent it because they're part of a Facebook group, or they're part of a Twitter something, I don't know, where they would come across these images. And Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he talks about this in some detail. He talks about how actually these images that are seen, these images, where obviously Ibn al-Qayyim is not talking about Facebook and pornography, but he's talking about, images where it may be in real life or otherwise, where these images become stamped upon one's heart. And the more and more, people see images of this nature, the heart then becomes increasingly accustomed to and overwhelmed by this sort of thing. That's why when you read articles on pornography or whatever, people have said that they find it very difficult to leave pornography because it's something that they have to keep going back to. The stamping or the images on their heart which make them think about it. So, you'd start remembering these sort of things. You'd start fantasizing about